A sloth, a donkey, and a curious human. Send a prompt and see what they're doing. One hits record with a question on his mind. Two brothers pick it up, see what they find. Corn takes his time, Herman's got the facts. Back and forth, they never hold back. My weird prompts, come on in, that's where we begin. My weird prompts, glad you're here.
This episode was generated using artificial intelligence. Please verify facts.
You know, Corn, this whole show runs on GPU compute, and we wouldn't be here without Modal.
Seriously. And that's what powers all our text-to-speech. Everything you're hearing right now.
They're an AI infrastructure platform. Developers use them to run GPU workloads in the cloud with zero infrastructure headaches.
If you're building anything with AI, check them out. Modal.com. You ever order something from AliExpress? Maybe a replacement part for a drone or a specific kitchen gadget, and it shows up at your door in Israel faster than a package sent from Tel Aviv. It feels like some kind of glitch in the Matrix, right? Like the laws of physics and geography just took a coffee break.
It really does. You're looking at a 7,000-kilometer journey versus a 60-kilometer one, and the international one wins. It's wild. But think about the sheer density of that achievement. To make that happen, a package has to clear Chinese export customs, get sorted in a massive facility like the one in Shenzhen, find a slot on a cargo plane, which is a game of Tetris played with multi-million-dollar stakes, land in a hub like Liège or Dubai, clear Israeli customs, and then hit the local distribution network.
When you lay it out like that, it sounds like a miracle that it ever arrives at all, let alone in 3 days.
It's incredible. But the thing is, it's not magic and it's not a glitch. It's the result of an incredibly sophisticated, invisible architecture built by people most of us never think about. Today's prompt from Daniel is asking us to pull back the curtain on those people, the supply chain and logistics professionals. We talk about the what of global trade all the time, but Daniel wants us to dig into the who. Who are the people who actually know what an encoderm is without looking it up? What's their training? Where do they actually spend their workdays? And, let's be real, what's the paycheck look like for someone who can teleport a package from Shenzhen to a doorstep in the Middle East in record time?
It's a great question, because we usually only notice these people when things go wrong, when the shelves are empty or the Suez Canal is blocked by a giant green ship. But when things are working perfectly, they're basically ghosts.
I love this prompt because these folks are effectively the clerics of the modern global economy. They're managing these massive, complex spells that keep the physical world moving. And by the way, for the tech nerds listening, today's episode is actually powered by Google Gemini 1.5 Flash. I'm Herman Poppleberry, and I've been spending my morning looking at the Council of Supply Chain Management Professionals' latest reports.
And I'm Corn, the one who usually just wonders why my package is stuck in a sorting center for 3 days. But seriously, Herman, we've touched on the $4 miracle before, where a tiny item travels across the globe for pennies. But we haven't really looked at the career path of the person orchestrating that miracle. It seems like a job that requires a very specific kind of brain, someone who can handle massive data sets, but also understands the grit of a port strike or a canal blockage.
Precisely. It's a blend of high-level mathematics and boots-on-the-ground reality. We're going to break this down into 3 main buckets: the education and certification paths, the diverse industries where these people actually land, and the compensation, which has seen some pretty dramatic shifts recently.
Alright, let's start with the how. You don't just wake up one day and know how to optimize a container ship's load factor. What does the training look like? Is this a get a degree in your set kind of field, or is it more of a trial by fire in a warehouse situation?
It's increasingly becoming the former, but with a heavy dose of the latter. 20 years ago, a lot of people fell into logistics. Maybe they started on a loading dock and worked their way up. Today, it's a highly structured academic discipline. If you're looking at the top tier, you're looking at universities like MIT, Michigan State, and Arizona State. These programs aren't just teaching you how to drive a forklift, they're teaching linear programming, stochastic modeling, and global macroeconomics.
Stochastic modeling? That sounds a bit heavy for moving boxes. How does that actually apply to a warehouse in New Jersey?
It's essential because the supply chain is essentially one giant exercise in probability. You're trying to predict the unpredictable weather patterns, geopolitical shifts, consumer whims. Think about a company like Zara. They use stochastic models to decide exactly how many yellow sweaters to send to a store in Munich versus a store in Madrid based on real-time sales data and weather forecasts. If the model is off by 2%, you have millions of dollars in dead inventory. At the undergraduate level, a bachelor's in supply chain management or logistics is the standard entry point, but what's really interesting is the certification landscape. In this industry, letters after your name like CSCP or CLTD actually carry as much weight, if not more, than a master's degree in many circles.
Okay, let's unpack those. I know Daniel mentioned them. CSCP, Certified Supply Chain Professional. What does that actually prove to an employer?
The CSCP, offered by ASCM, which used to be called APIX, is basically the gold standard for end-to-end knowledge. It proves you understand the entire life cycle of a product, from the raw materials being dug out of the ground to the final mile delivery, and even the reverse logistics of returns. If you have a CSCP, you're saying, I understand how a change in a copper mine in Chile affects the delivery date of a laptop in New York. It's about seeing the bullwhip effect, where a small change in consumer demand at the end of the chain causes massive, violent swings in production at the beginning.
So it's the big picture certification. But what about the day-to-day grit? You mentioned the CLTD earlier.
Certified in logistics, transportation, and distribution. That's for the folks who live and breathe the middle of the chain. Warehousing strategy, freight forwarding, customs clearance. If you want to be the person who figures out whether it's cheaper to fly components via a hub in Dubai or ship them through the Suez Canal, that's your certification. It covers things like intermodal, transport, moving a container from a ship to a train to a truck without ever opening the doors.
It strikes me that this is a field where you can't just rely on what you learned in 2022. I mean, the world changed so fast. How do these professionals stay current? Are they just constantly in workshops? Or is the software doing the heavy lifting now?
The software is a massive part of it, but the professional has to be the one to interpret the output. There's a huge shift towards supply chain analytics. We're seeing a lot of professionals now going back for master's degrees specifically in data science or AI applications for supply chains. Because if you're at a company like Amazon or AliExpress, you're not manually checking spreadsheets. You're managing an AI that is pre-positioning inventory.
Wait, hold on. Pre-positioning. That sounds like something a general does before an invasion. But how does that work for my 15 headphones?
It's exactly like a military maneuver. Think about the Israel paradox Daniel brought up. Why is it faster? Because a logistics professional analyzed years of data and realized that, say in April, there's a massive spike in demand for specific outdoor gear or electronics in Israel. Instead of waiting for the order, they move thousands of those units to a regional hub, maybe in Cyprus, maybe a bonded warehouse in a Mediterranean port, weeks before the orders even come in.
So the item is already 90% of the way there before I even click buy. But what happens if the data is wrong? If they move 50,000 headphones to Cyprus and nobody in Israel wants them?
That's where the logistics architect earns their keep. They have to build agility into the system. If those headphones don't sell in Tel Aviv, can they be diverted to Athens or Rome without incurring massive new customs duties? That requires a deep understanding of Incoterms. Daniel mentioned them. Incoterms are the legal grammar of global trade.
Give us a for dummies version of an Incoterm. Why is it so critical that these pros know them like the back of their hand?
Okay, imagine you're buying 1,000 iPhones from a factory. An Incoterm like FOB or free on board means the seller's responsibility ends the moment those phones cross the ship's rail at the port of origin. If the ship sinks 10 minutes later, that's your problem, not the factory's. You better hope your logistics pro bought the right insurance. But if the term is DDP, delivered duty paid, the seller is responsible for everything until it hits your warehouse door, including taxes and customs.
So, if a logistics pro mixes those up, they could cost their company millions in uninsured losses or unexpected taxes. It's like a secret language that dictates who pays when things go sideways.
Millions. Easily. It's the difference between a profitable quarter and a total disaster. That's why these specialists are so focused on the details. They're effectively risk managers who happen to deal with physical objects. They spend their days looking at force majeure clauses and port congestion surcharges.
But how does one actually learn the nuances of something like force majeure in the context of a port strike? Is that part of the CSCP exam, or is that something you only learn when the picket lines go up?
It's a bit of both. The certifications give you the framework. They teach you the definitions and the legal boundaries, but the application is pure experience. A senior logistics manager will have a playbook for a strike at the Port of Long Beach. They know which alternative ports have the right rail connections and which ones are already over capacity. It's about having a mental map of the world's infrastructure that goes way beyond Google Maps.
It sounds like a high-stress environment. I'm imagining a control room with red lights flashing because a ship got stuck in the Suez. But where do these people actually work? Is it all just big retail and shipping companies?
That's the big misconception. People hear logistics and think warehouse manager and a neon vest. And sure, those roles are vital, but the workplace diversity in this field is staggering. You've got people in high-tech manufacturing, like at Intel or Nvidia, where the supply chain is a global web of semiconductor fabs and assembly plants. If one chemical supplier in Japan has a fire, the whole global production of GPUs could stall. The people managing that are working in sleek corporate offices in Santa Clara using predictive software to find alternative suppliers in real time.
What about fields that are purely commercial, like healthcare or even aerospace? I imagine the stakes there are a bit higher than a missing kitchen gadget.
Oh, healthcare is massive. Pharmaceutical logistics is probably the most high-stakes version of this. You're dealing with cold chain requirements, vaccines that have to stay between 2 and 8 degrees Celsius from the factory in Belgium to a clinic in a remote part of Africa. If the temperature fluctuates for an hour, the entire batch is trash. The logistics professionals there are basically scientists of movement. They're tracking GPS-enabled thermal sensors in real time. If a truck breaks down in the desert, they have a contingency protocol that might involve dispatching a secondary refrigerated unit within a 2-hour window.
That's intense. It's literally a life or death supply chain. Does that mean those professionals have a background in biology or chemistry too?
Often, yes. You'll see quality assurance specialists within the logistics department who have degrees in life sciences. They need to understand the molecular stability of the product to know how much buffer they have if a cooling system fails. It's a very specialized niche.
And Daniel mentioned SpaceX. Space logistics, that sounds like something out of a sci-fi novel. How do you even apply Incoterms to Mars?
We aren't quite at Mars FOB yet, but it's the ultimate frontier for this profession. Think about it. If you're building a base on the moon or sending a mission to Mars, you can't just order more if you forget a bolt. Every gram of weight counts, and every piece of the supply chain has to be perfectly synchronized years in advance. SpaceX has people whose entire job is managing the flow of specialized alloys and rocket components from hundreds of global suppliers to South Texas or Cape Canaveral. It's the most complex, just-in-time system ever devised. If a specific valve from a supplier in Switzerland is 3 days late, the entire launch window, which might only open once every few months, could be missed.
It's funny, we think of just in time as a buzzword from the 90s, but it's actually more relevant now than ever, isn't it? Or did the pandemic kill that idea?
It's evolved. After the 2021-2022 supply chain crisis, the industry moved toward what they call just-in-case or regionalization. The workplace for a logistics pro now often involves a lot of resilience planning. They're not just looking for the cheapest route, they're looking for the most anti-fragile route. They might split their sourcing 60% from China, 20% from Vietnam, and 20% from Mexico. It's more expensive, but it means a single point of failure won't kill the company.
I like that term, anti-fragile. So, if I'm a logistics director at a Fortune 500 company, my office might be a boardroom, but my workplace is effectively the entire globe. How much does that travel and responsibility translate into actual money? Daniel mentioned some numbers, but let's dig into the compensation. Is this a get-rich career path?
It's become a very lucrative path, especially in the last 5 years. Before the pandemic, supply chain was often seen as a back-office cost center, something to be minimized. Now, it's seen as a strategic competitive advantage. If you can get products to customers faster than your rival, you win. CEOs have realized that the chief supply chain officer is just as important as the CFO.
So the supply chain crisis was basically a giant marketing campaign for the profession. It's like the world finally realized the pipes in the house actually matter.
Unintentionally, yes, it proved that without these people, the world stops. According to the Council of Supply Chain Management Professionals, The CSCMP, their 2025 report shows a median salary of around $95,000 for the profession as a whole. But that's a broad median. If you're a specialist with 3 to 5 years of experience and a CSCP certification, you're likely looking at $80,000 to $90,000. If you're in a niche like customs brokerage or hazardous materials logistics, you can command a significant premium because the legal liability is so high.
And the upper end? I'm guessing the people at the top of Amazon's logistics pyramid aren't hurting for cash.
That's where it gets interesting. Directors of supply chain at major tech or pharmaceutical firms are easily cleared for $160,000 to $200,000, often with significant stock options and bonuses. In some sectors, like oil and gas or specialized tech, global supply chain VPs are pulling in seven-figure total compensation packages. Why? Because if a VP of supply chain saves a company 2% on their global freight spend through better optimization, that could be $50 million directly to the bottom line. Companies are happy to pay a premium for that kind of math.
What about geographic variation? I assume being a logistics pro in a major hub pays more. Does a guy in a port city make more than someone in a landlocked state?
Huge difference. If you're in a logistics gateway like Singapore, Rotterdam, Dubai, or Chicago, the salaries are significantly higher. In Singapore, for example, the government has invested so heavily in being a global hub that supply chain professionals are treated like elite tech workers. They have specialized logistics executive visas. In the US, the Inland Empire in California, where all the massive warehouses for the Port of LA are located, has become a massive wealth generator for logistics managers.
It's interesting that Daniel mentioned the resilience premium. That suggests companies are now paying extra for people who can handle chaos, not just people who can follow a manual. Is there a specific chaos skill set?
The resilience premium is real. We're seeing a trend where companies are hiring former military logistics officers, people who manage supply lines in combat zones, because they know how to operate when the plan falls apart. They're paying for that anti-fragile mindset. They want the person who doesn't panic when a canal gets blocked, but instead has 3 alternative rail routes already pre-negotiated and ready to go. It's about contingency density.
Contingency density. That's a great phrase. It basically means having a plan B, C, and D already loaded and ready to fire. But how does that work in practice? If an earthquake hits a supplier in Taiwan, does the Resilience Pro just hit a button and switch to a factory in Malaysia?
In a perfect world, yes. But in reality, it means they've already vetted that Malaysian factory, they've already cleared the legal and quality hurdles, and they might even have a small pilot contract running with them just to keep the relationship warm. It's expensive to maintain that level of redundancy, but as we saw in 2020, the cost of not having it is bankruptcy.
So, we've got the training degrees plus those heavy hitter certifications. We've got the workplaces, from cold chain vaccine transport to SpaceX rocket parts. And we've got the paycheck, a very solid middle class to upper class bracket. But Herman, let's talk about the day-to-day. What does a supply chain specialist actually do when they sit down at their desk at 9:30 a.m.? Is it just emails and yelling at truck drivers?
It's a lot of exception management. If everything is going perfectly, the AI and the automated systems handle it. The human specialist gets involved when there's a red flag. Maybe a port in Ningbo is experiencing a slowdown due to a storm. The specialist's dashboard lights up. They have to immediately decide, do we wait it out? Do we divert the ship to a different port? Or do we pull some of that inventory from a regional hub in Europe to cover the shortfall in the US? They're looking at ETA drift, how far the actual arrival time is moving away from the planned time.
It sounds like playing a real-time strategy game, but with real money and real products. Like StarCraft, but with cargo containers.
It is, and you're constantly negotiating. You're on the phone with freight forwarders, customs brokers, and warehouse managers. You're looking at blank sailings, that's when a shipping line cancels a trip, and trying to find space on another vessel. It's a high-stakes puzzle that resets every single day. You might start the day worried about a shipment of rubber from Malaysia and end it worried about a labor strike in Germany.
I'm curious about the human element here. If you're a specialist at a mid-sized firm, are you actually talking to the guy driving the truck? Or is there a layer of software between you?
It depends on the size of the operation. At a massive company like Walmart, you're looking at high-level data dashboards. But at a mid-sized firm, you might very well be on the phone with a dispatcher in Ohio trying to figure out why a driver is stuck at a way station. That's where the boots on the ground knowledge comes in. You need to know that a specific mountain pass is closed or that a certain warehouse has a reputation for slow unloading.
You know, what strikes me is how much this field has moved away from just moving boxes. Daniel's point about managing global data flows is spot on. If you're at AliExpress, you're not a shipping guy. You're a data architect who happens to move physical objects.
That's the most important takeaway for anyone considering this career. If you're not comfortable with data, you're going to struggle. You need to understand data latency, how fast information moves from the ship to your screen. But if you can bridge the gap between what the data says and how a truck actually moves on a highway, you are incredibly valuable. You're the translator between the digital world and the physical world.
It's basically the digital twin concept applied to the whole world. You have a digital model of the supply chain, and your job is to make sure the physical world matches it as closely as possible.
And when the physical world refuses to cooperate, which it often does, you have to be the one to fix the model. You're constantly tweaking the variables. What if we change the lead time on this component from 30 days to 45? How does that affect our cash flow?
Let's talk about that cash flow aspect for a second. I think people forget that inventory is just money sitting in a box. If a logistics pro can reduce the days of inventory on hand, they're basically finding free money for the company, right?
That's called working capital optimization. If you have 100 million worth of goods sitting on ships or in warehouses, that's 100 million you can't spend on R&D or marketing. If a logistics pro can use data to shorten that cycle by just 5 days, they might free up 10 million in cash. That's why the CFO loves them. They are the masters of the cash-to-cash cycle.
So, for the listeners who are hearing this and thinking, actually, I like puzzles, I like data, and I like the idea of being the person who makes the global economy hum, what's the first step? If you're currently in a different field, maybe you're a software dev or a business analyst, how do you pivot into this?
The pivot is actually easier than people think. If you're already in tech, look into supply chain technology. Companies are desperate for people who understand ERP systems, enterprise resource planning like SAP or Oracle, but who also understand the logistics side. If you can write the code that optimizes a warehouse layout, you're golden.
And if you're just starting out, say you're a college student or are looking for a total career 180.
Go for the certifications Daniel mentioned. Honestly, if you have a general business degree and you go and get your CSCP, you are immediately more employable in the logistics sector than someone with a generic MBA. It shows you know the legal grammar of the industry. It's a signal to employers that you won't need to be taught what a bill of lading is on day one.
I love that. Legal grammar. It makes it sound much more sophisticated than just shipping and receiving. It's the connective tissue of civilization.
It is. It's the protocol that runs the world. Without it, we're back to local bartering.
You know, we should probably talk about the AliExpress to Israel thing one more time, because it's such a perfect case study of how this all comes together. Why Israel? Why is it such a logistics laboratory? Is it just because it's a small country?
It's more than that. Israel is a fascinating case because it's effectively an island in terms of trade. Almost everything has to come in via sea or air. Because of the geopolitical situation, you don't have a lot of overland truck freight coming from neighboring countries. So, if you want to get goods into Israel efficiently, you have to be a master of sea and air logistics. You can't just drive a truck from a neighboring manufacturing hub like you can in Europe.
And AliExpress realized that the standard way shipping from China to a port in Haifa and then waiting for the local mail system was too slow for the modern consumer. People want their drone parts now, not in 6 weeks.
Right? So they used that pre-positioning we talked about. They looked at the data and said, okay, Israelis love these 3 specific electronics brands. They moved those in bulk to a hub in, say, Liège, Belgium, or even closer in the Mediterranean. When you click order, it's already cleared customs in a bulk format and just needs that last mile jump. They've essentially turned an international shipment into a regional one by being smart about where they park their inventory.
And the people who designed that jump are the ones getting those 6-figure salaries. They're the ones who calculated that the cost of storing the goods in a hub was lower than the cost of losing a customer who didn't want to wait a month.
They're the ones who realized that the bottleneck wasn't the distance, it was the friction of customs and local sorting. They engineered the friction out of the system. That's the core of the job, friction reduction.
It's a good reminder that fast usually just means well planned. It's not that the planes are flying faster, it's that the paperwork was done 3 weeks ago.
Every single time. Efficiency is just the absence of surprises.
But wait, how do they handle the last mile? In a country like Israel, I've heard the local postal service isn't always as high-tech as the Shenzhen sorting center.
That's where local partnership comes in. A smart logistics professional doesn't just hand it off to the post office and pray. They negotiate with private couriers or create pickup point networks in local convenience stores. They bypass the traditional bottlenecks by creating a parallel infrastructure. It's all part of the distribution, part of the CLTD certification.
All right, let's wrap this part of the discussion with some practical takeaways. If you're a business owner, or even just a curious consumer, why should you care about the career path of these professionals? Why does it matter that they have those letters after their name?
Because the quality of your life is directly tied to their competence. From the food in your fridge to the medicine in your cabinet, it all depends on a logistics professional who didn't mess up an encoderm at 3000 AM. For business owners, the takeaway is simple. Don't underinvest in your supply chain talent. A great logistics manager is a profit center, not a cost. They are the ones who will find you $5 million in savings just by changing how you package your pallets for air freight.
I've actually seen that. I read about a company that saved millions just by making their product boxes 3 millimeters thinner so they could fit an extra row on every pallet.
That's cube utilization. It sounds boring, but when you're shipping 10,000 containers a year, those 3 millimeters pay for a lot of salaries. It's the ultimate game of marginal gains.
And for the individuals, it's a field with high job security, good pay, and the chance to literally see how the world works from the inside out. It's not just about moving boxes, it's about being the architect of the physical world's internet. It's one of the few jobs where you can point to the ship in the harbor and say, I put that there.
I love that. The physical internet. That's exactly what it is. It's the hardware layer of the global economy.
Well, I think we've given the shipping guys the respect they deserve today. It's a lot more than just clipboards and warehouses. It's high stakes, high tech, and high paying.
Much more. It's high-level strategy and global impact. If you want to be where the action is, look at the supply chain.
Before we head out, we should probably look at what's coming next for this field. Daniel mentioned AI and automation, but what about the next 10 years? Does the logistics pro get replaced by a bot, or does their job just get even more complex? Does the CSCP certification eventually include AI prompt engineering?
It's the latter. The boring parts, the data entry, the basic route optimization, that's all being automated. But the judgment part? The part where you have to weigh the risk of a political uprising in a transit country versus the cost of an air freight pivot, a bot can't do that. The future logistics pro is going to be more of a supply chain orchestrator. They'll be the ones setting the parameters for the AI to follow.
Orchestrator. I like that. Sounds much more maestro and much less store manager. It implies a level of artistry in how you move millions of tons of goods around the planet.
They'll be directing a symphony of automated ships, drones, and AI-predicted warehouses. It's a great time to be entering the field because the tools are finally catching up to the complexity of the task.
You know, it reminds me of how pilots went from manually wrestling with stick and rudder controls to being systems managers in a high-tech cockpit. The logistics pro is going through that same transformation right now.
That's a perfect analogy. They're the pilots of global trade. They might not be pulling the levers themselves anymore, but they're the ones responsible for the flight path and the safety of the cargo.
Well, I'm glad someone is doing it, because I'm still just trying to figure out which drawer my socks are in. My personal supply chain is a total disaster.
Baby steps, corn. Maybe you need a personal reverse logistics strategy for your laundry.
Alright, let's pivot into the final takeaways for our listeners. We've covered a lot of ground, from the Incoterm masters to the resilience premium in their paychecks. Herman, what's the one thing you want people to remember from this deep dive?
If you're looking for a career that is future-proof, this is it. As long as we live in a physical world, we need to move physical things. And as that world gets more chaotic and complex, the people who can navigate that chaos are only going to become more valuable. It's a career of the future that has been around since the Silk Road.
And for the consumers out there, next time your package arrives from China in 3 days, maybe take a second to appreciate the invisible architects who made it happen. It's a masterpiece of planning. Don't just complain when it's late. Marvel when it's on time.
It really is. Every on-time delivery is a victory over entropy.
Well, that's our look at the world of supply chain professionals. Thanks to Daniel for the prompt. It's a topic that definitely deserves more airtime. It's easy to ignore the plumbing until it breaks, but the people who keep the water flowing are the ones we should be watching. And thanks as always to our producer, Hilbert Flumingtop, for keeping our own supply chain of episodes moving smoothly.
And a big thanks to Modal for providing the GPU credits that powered this show. We couldn't do these deep dives without that infrastructure. They're part of our own tech supply chain.
This has been My Weird Prompts. If you're enjoying these deep dives into the hidden systems of our world, do us a favor and leave a review on your podcast app. It really does help other curious minds find the show. Tell a friend, or better yet, tell your local logistics manager.
We'll be back next time with another prompt from Daniel. Until then, keep wondering how the world actually works. Keep looking for the invisible systems.
See ya. Kawaii!
Goodbye.
This episode was produced using Google Gemini 3 Flash. Text-to-speech by Chatterbox.
Thanks for listening to our show, My Weird Prompts, where our thoughts go from slow to